Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Zoom and social media. My name is Kadir Üstün. I'm the Executive Director at the CETA Foundation at Washington, D.C. Today, we are hosting a panel on Libya, Turkey's Libya policy. Our event is titled, "What's at Stake for Turkey in Libya?" Turkey's involvement, as you know, in Libya over the past 6 months or so has been decisive in changing the dynamics, the balance of power on the ground in the conflict between Haftar forces and UN-recognized GNA government in Tripoli. A potential takeover of GNA government by Haftar seemed imminent at the end of 2019, but Turkey's intervention changed the dynamics. Now GNA government is in control and it has been advancing and it has been told not to advance towards places like Sirte by Egypt, for instance. So it tells you that GNA government has been emboldened, has been able to advance thanks to Turkey's support, both on the ground, militarily, in terms of security and political and diplomatic support as well. At the same time, there's an ongoing regional proxy war, as we can call it. Russia, France, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt are on the side of Haftar forces, and Europeans are divided as well. Italy is kind of on Turkey's side. But Turkey seems marching towards deepening its relationship with the North African country. Of course, the game is not over. We saw that on July 4th, there was an attack by unidentified military planes on the military airbase in Al Watiya. It's not clear who did it and against what, but that airbase is critically important for GNA government. So, of course, we have two great experts who are following very closely both the military and political aspects of what's going on in Libya and Turkey's policy. We have with us Dr. Professor Talha Köse. Talha is the chair of Political Science and International Relations Department at İbn Haldun University in Istanbul. And we have Murat Yeşiltaş. He is the Director of Security Studies Program at the CETA Foundation in Ankara. We will start with their general comments for a couple minutes, and then I'll ask a few questions, and I want to turn to the audience. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A chat box, please, and I'll try to integrate those questions as we go along. And we want to answer all questions if possible throughout the session. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll start with Talha. Talha, the title of our event, that's my question to you. What is at stake for Turkey in Libya? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kadir. It's a pleasure to be with CETA DC. So I will basically talk about how Turkey got involved in Libya and why Turkey decided to get involved and what Turkey expects from this experience, this intervention. Like the case of Syria, the Libya issue became internationalized and unfortunately turned into a proxy confrontation. So there are some similarities and some differences in the context of Syria, because the parties couldn't reach an agreement or couldn't reach a solution, the conflict got internationalized. In the case of Libya, the conflict got deepened because of the internationalization of the conflict, because of the involvement of external actors. We have to keep this in mind. So from the beginning on, Libyan issue became an international conflict. So although in the Syrian case, there are more, in the Libyan context, there are more commonalities between the people, whereas in Syria, it is more, divided country. So under the dictatorship of Gaddafi, almost everybody was oppressed, and there is similarity in victimhood. So because the conflict got internationalized, I think it is crucial to understand position of 4 key actors in Libya context. So definitely Turkey is one of those actors. And I don't consider Egypt one of these 4 key actors, because no matter what happens in the Libyan context, Egypt will play a significant role, and Egypt can be a part of any coalition. So for the moment, Egypt plays with Abu Dhabi and Paris, but Egypt can also play with the other actors. But the key, I think, key actor at this moment is the United Arab Emirates, UAE. So why UAE is involved in Libya, I think it's key to understand. So they have a counter-revolutionary posture and ideological commitment in the region, and they want to spread monarcho dictatorships in the entire region. And they consider Turkey and Qatar as a most important obstacle to their regional ambitions and ideological ambitions. So they use counter-Islamism as their pretext to get involved in the region. But unfortunately, they also have some geopolitical ambitions. They try to control key routes, key sea routes and ports in the region. So they are preparing for the post-fossil fuel world. So UAE is the key stakeholders, which also invited France and Russia to Libyan context. France is the second important actor. I think for France, they in the past lost their significance, their involvement in sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa, in the case of Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. So, and Libya is key for their involvement in Sahel region. So it is key for France to keep their connection, the geopolitical ties with their Sahel region or former colonies. So they consider if Turkey and another actor controls Libya, if there is some stability in Libya, they may lose their touch in that context. So France's involvement is because of the incompetence, I think, of the previous French leaders, and Macron even deepened this incompetence. And Russian involvement, so the third actor is Russian involvement. It is more of an opportunistic actor. So they wanted to have cracks within EU and NATO. Russia wants to strengthen its position in Eastern Mediterranean and wants to be one of the key stakeholders, players in the Africa, but and because of the involvement of UAE and France, and because of their incompetence, they invited Russia. So for Russia, this is not a key national security issue, but it's an opportunity to generate cracks within EU and NATO. And they are not deeply committed to Haftar. We have to keep in mind that they even consider Haftar as a liability rather than an asset because of Haftar's risky ventures. So because of the incompetence of the UAE and France, Russia is invited by those actors. And finally, Turkey is the fourth actor. They play a key role in internationalized conflicts. So Turkey's position is rather defensive and counter geopolitical encirclement in nature. So actually, Turkey wanted to be sidelined in Eastern Mediterranean gas geopolitical game. So this is considered as a significant threat to Turkey's long-term interest, and some people even within the Turkey's military consider this naval sails. So Cyprus, and the Greece organized this thing, and they tried to encircle Turkey in Aegean and Levant and in Syria. So Turkey considered actually this issue of encirclement in Eastern Mediterranean a significant threat. So that's why Turkey's position in the beginning was quite defensive in its mood. So how Turkey got involved in Libya, I think it's also important, because we know that after the Syria crisis, which is one of the most significant foreign policy crises for Turkey after the 1974 Cyprus intervention, Turkey actually wanted to refrain from the external issues in the region. But as I said, the Greek Cypriots wanted to isolate Turkey in Antalya coast. So Turkish military took this seriously. So I think the Turkey's involvement in Libya is not just a governmental involvement, but it's a state involvement. I think this is in the doctrine of Turkish national security, which is formulated as Blue Homeland Doctrine. And I think even if the government changes, Turkey will be stuck, will be persistent in its Eastern Mediterranean policy. So we also have to understand this thing. So because of Turkey's, UAE, Saudi Arabia wanted to use Turkey's vulnerabilities in the region. They also wanted to change the regime in Qatar. So with the involvement of Turkey, this Qatar crisis have been resolved in favor of Qatar. So I think this changed Turkey's position in this crisis. So UAE and Saudi involvement in Yemen, Libya led to civil wars, and their involvement led to coup in Egypt and Sudan. So I think with the successful involvement of Turkey in Qatar crisis, I think which prevented the regime change. The other important issue, Turkey's involvement in Syria, also with Turkey's military campaign in Idlib prevented the situation and continuation of the civil war. So Russia and Assad regime planned to end the civil war in Syria by military means, but Turkey's involvement in Operation Euphrates Shield, Olive Branch, and Spring Shield, all these operations prevented a unilateral military victory for the regime, and also prevented the PKK Strait, PKK controlled area in Turkey's border. I think this is also, these two interventions are also very important and successful, especially in the Idlib crisis, in the recent Idlib issue. Turkey's successful drone campaign changed the course of the involvement and balance of power. So, and even I think these two successful military ventures led GNA to contact Turkey in the Libyan context. Of course, Turkey has some interest, but the invitation came from GNA's side, and Turkey's successful involvement and intervention, especially in the drone warfare, also changed the course of the war in Libya. So these previous interventions in the last 2-3 years led Turkey's success, also led GNA to invite Turkey in this context. So as I said, Turkey felt excluded and encircled in the Eastern Mediterranean, rather formulated this Blue Homeland Doctrine and wanted to be an important partner in the energy resources game. So one of the vulnerabilities of Turkey, especially in the economic dependence, is the dependence on gas and oil, which is a big obstacle for Turkey's budget deficit. So Turkey also didn't want to be excluded from the hydrocarbon game in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's why, in addition to the geopolitical dimension, there's a geoeconomic dimension in Turkey's involvement in Eastern Mediterranean, where it is the next big source of hydrocarbons in the region. So the other thing is that Turkey's feeling of threat in YPG in the eastern part of the Euphrates. There is American support for the PKK YPG for the emergence of an autonomous region. On the western part, there is Russian and Syrian pressures. So these pressures also felt Turkey is to create some terror-free zones in those regions. So Turkey, Ankara feels that Russia is instrumentalizing the threat of refugee flow in Syria, and US is instrumentalizing the YPG-controlled entity in Syria to pressure Turkey. And also Greece, Cyprus, southern Cyprus, Egypt, Israel are also trying to isolate Turkey within the sea. So this, I think the sense of sieges was important, and there is a consensus among the Turkey's security bureaucracy to break this encirclement by military means. But it is more of a defensive in its posture. So what Turkey wants to achieve in Libya? So finally, why Turkey gets and what Turkey wants? So actually, from the beginning on, Turkey doesn't want a military solution in Libya. So Libya political agreement, actually Suhayrat agreement, provided a political roadmap which could bring long-term stability to Libya. So unification of Libya and political process was important. Turkey also supported Berlin process, Berlin agreement, despite it was against Turkey's interests. But unfortunately, the political process did not work. So I think the Turkey is not in favor of a military solution, and it makes it clear for the GNA as well. So Turkey is against the strongman solution as well. So the Haftar style, or generating a new Sisi in Libya is not the acceptable option for Libya. So it would be only the new Gaddafi and will not bring stability to the Libyan context. Inclusive political processes, inclusive political institutions are more important for the long-term stability. Turkey also do not want the counter-revolutionary bloc led by United Arab Emirates to gain one more victory to topple another democratic regime in the region. So those evil forces, according to Turkey, should abandon their aggressions in the region. So these monarcho-dictatorships that are sponsored by UAE and Saudi Arabia should be countered by some way, because Turkey also and Qatar are also targeted by this coalition, and there is an ongoing ideological battle and geopolitical battle with these actors that support monarcho dictatorships. There is also, Turkey is against the fragmentation of Libya, so we know that United Arab Emirates wants to divide Yemen. They try to divide Somalia, and they also have the policy to divide and control some parts of Libya. So Turkey is definitely against the division and fragmentation of Libya. So Iraq, Syria, Yemen and Lebanon are terrible examples for fragmentation. And also Turkey doesn't want the balance of radical groups with another group of radicals like Medhali Salafis. So those Medhali Salafis are against moderate religious understanding of Libya. They try to destroy Sufism and also more moderate understanding, and they are sponsored by Saudis and UAE. So Turkey is against the Medhali Salafis in the region. And also, Turkey is also against this, centrifugal tendencies. So, taking all these into account, I think, one key thing in Libya is that. So, yes, I mean, Turkey may have problems with Greece and Greek Cypriots and United Arab Emirates, but with Israel, Egypt, and France, Turkey doesn't have long-term, deep conflict of interest, so they can be sorted out diplomatically. With the Russian situation, it is more complicated because Turkey feels Russian expansionism in Black Sea, expansionism in Syria, and faces with Russia in Libya. So NATO and EU puts pressure on Turkey because of relations with Libya, but I think they put the pressure on the right, wrong side. So if they continue to put more pressure on Turkey in critical security issues, Turkey will be closer to Russia. They have to put pressure rather on Russia or the actors like France and UAE who plays with Russia. And finally, I think one key issue which may also let Ankara to play more constructive role is to involve NATO. So NATO doesn't take Turkey's fundamental national security issues very closely, and there's a lack of dialogue. That's why in many issues, Turkey takes unilateral ventures. So I think any further pressure on Turkey by NATO will only bring Ankara closer to Moscow, and this would weaken EU and NATO. And deepening the dialogue between US, EU, and NATO would make Ankara to play more constructive role in the region. So it seems that Turkey's involvement in Libya is strategic and is likely to stay, but some other actors may also play significant roles if there is some constructive dialogue in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Taha. My question was what's at stake in Libya for Turkey? The short answer I'm hearing from you is there's a lot at stake in Libya. You mentioned ideological dimension, geopolitics, geoeconomics, and also some of the military capabilities issues and Turkey's confidence to conduct operations abroad. Among other things, of course. But Murat, I don't know how much more you can add, but if you can maybe focus on the security aspects, because that's what your focus is. We've seen a lot of Turkey's capabilities being deployed in Libya in a very interesting way. There was that drone operation that became famous, but you don't have to restrict yourself to that, but please address the security dimensions, but anything else you want to add. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Kadir, for having me. It's always a great honor with you. Of course, actually, many topics have been mentioned, my dear colleague Talha. I'm trying to focus on different aspects, but of course, I would say that I'm sharing what Talha already mentioned about Turkey's position over the Libyan crisis. But something is really important to understand Turkey's position is that which points are you taking into consideration in terms of the date of Turkey's involvement into the crisis, right? I think this is really important to contextualize Turkey's strategic interest in Libya and Turkey's strategic, or let's say the geopolitical interest over the regional issues. So the turning points are really important, therefore. For example, if you take into consideration post-Berlin process to understand Turkey's military involvement into the Libyan crisis, you can easily argue that Turkey has geopolitical ambitions in the region. And you can add that Turkey is trying to increase its military presence abroad. Turkey wants to create military bases all around the region, across the region. This is not limited with Libya. You can also take into consideration Qatar, Somalia, and other places. And you can draw a big picture about Turkey's geopolitical, options. But if you take into consideration the historical transformation of the Libyan crisis, and particularly Turkey's position during this historical transformation, then you can make sense of what Turkey is really achieving, is really want to, achieve in Libya. So, and I think security is also an integral part of this historical transformation. For example, when you look at the, revolutionary process, I mean the 17 February revolution process, Turkey had legal security concern over Libya, in Libya, of course. But when you look at the current regional, dynamics, Turkey has many security concerns over Libya, because the time is changed and the regional politics has been transforming since 2011. So therefore, I think we have to divide it into at least 4 different periods of Turkey's security perceptions vis-a-vis Libyan crisis. I think the first turning point is the revolutionary process. In the beginning of the Libyan crisis, context of the Arab revolutions, Turkey's policy objective was to support the political change, not only in Libya, but also in Egypt and other, Arab uprising countries. So therefore, UN and the United Nations was the main reference point for Turkey. And in the context of United Nations framework, I think Turkey supported political change and transition after Gaddafi. This was a very important point for Turkey, because Turkey really supported the regional, democratic transformation in the region. And of course, the second one in this period, Turkey's main objective was to prevent external military and political intervention into the Libyan crisis. And of course, after the Gaddafi, Turkey wanted to enhance its economic relations with the Libyan side. So, and there was a huge opportunity in terms of the, economic benefits of the post-revolutionary Libyan, political and economic atmosphere. But when we look at the, post-revolutionary process, approximately between 2012 and 2014, there was a different geopolitical and geostrategic landscape emerged in Libya and in the region. And even in this period, Turkey again supported the, the political transition periods in Libya, and Turkey never interfered into the Libyan domestic, affairs. And Turkey supported national dialogue. This was very important. Still, Turkey is supporting national dialogue, and Turkey supported, peace talks and diplomatic negotiation between, what we know today as GNA government and what we know House of Representatives after 2012. But something, changed after 2019. After 4 years, the political turmoils in the region, something changed actually across the region. So, and everybody knows about the changing position of different countries. And of course, Turkey had to militarily interfere Syria. And there were many different types of security, risk and threats, which was emanating from the Syrian crisis and the new geopolitical competition, especially between Turkey and Saudi-led coalition across the region, including United Arab Emirates and Egypt. So this was a new geopolitical competition, I think, and this geopolitical competition shaped Turkey's security concern, not only in Libya, but also in the Mediterranean Sea. So I'm not talking about only the Eastern Mediterranean, problem or domain of Turkey's geopolitical policies. So therefore, after, April 4 in 2019, Turkey started to, reframe the Libyan crisis. And Turkey started to frame Libyan crisis from the very, security perspective. So before I think in 2019, so there was a security perspective in Turkey's, amongst the security establishment in Ankara and in Turkey. But after the, Khalifa Haftar attempts to take over the GNA government in Tripoli, Turkey's concern and strategic priorities started to change. And then we started to see Turkey's, new policy, new instrument, and new strategy after the April 4 in Libya. So I think the first one actually is important to understand current dynamics regarding Turkey's security interests. In the beginning, following the April 4, let's say, military coup attempt of Haftar, Turkey initiated a very strong international community approach. Turkey supported political dialogue between two parties, actually. Turkey did not want to involve into the crisis by supporting only one side of the Libyan crisis. Of course, Turkey supported UN recognized GNA government and treated Haftar as the coup plotter, but still Turkey supported the dialogue, the national dialogue, and the political peace process. But interestingly, international, audience or international community did not look at what Turkey was saying about Libyan crisis. France did not say anything about the transition process. United States, again, did not mention any kind of specific international diplomatic summit to find a comprehensive solution to the Libyan crisis. Even in Italy, of course, was at the neutral position, but they did not provide any acceptable and comprehensive peace plan. And Turkey again called some sort of peace plan after the following the April 4 process. Then we came at a conclusion, the Haftar military operation against Tripoli. Haftar took over Sirte, Haftar took over Tarhuna, Haftar took over Al-Watiya airbase, Haftar took over south parts of Tripoli, and Haftar almost took over every single piece of Libyan territory. We know all of that. So, and then Turkey had to intervene into the Libyan crisis militarily. But before this, Berlin process, Turkey did something very right, a very strategic point of view. I think this is one point that we need to talk about the security perspective. It was the Memorandum of Understanding. So Memorandum of Understanding was a different initiative in which we have to contextualize in Turkey's security perspective towards the region. So, and I think Talha have already mentioned all the points regarding the Turkey's security and geopolitical, policies in the region. But this Memorandum of Understanding, I think, allow Turkey to reshape the Libyan crisis, not only in the context of the battlefield domain, but also in the context of the regional and international scale. So, and I think we have to focus on this post-Berlin process. And if, we should also underline the, failed ceasefire process in Moscow as well. You remember all of these. The ceasefire process failed. Why? Because United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and France did not want to, freeze the situation. They wanted to support Haftar to take over all the Tripoli. They really, I think they really thought that Haftar could do this, could achieve this. But after this process, I think Turkey located Libya its own national interest perspective. I think Libya became a centerpiece, of the Turkey's security interest, because Turkey wanted to prevent regional geopolitical, anti-Turkey geopolitical bloc in the region. Turkey wants to, maintain its national interest over Cyprus, over natural gas exploration, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the post-Berlin process is really important. And now what we know now from Turkey's security perspective, because Turkey, I think there are four at least different dynamics to understand post-Berlin strategic landscape in Libya and Turkey's security interests. First of all, Turkey perceived Libya as a part of regional geopolitical game. In the context of this regional geopolitical game, Turkey, wants to gain more leverage and influence over other regional issues. I think we can put Syrian crisis into this context. We can put other regional issues into this context. So therefore, bringing Libya into the Turkey's national interest perspective will provide Turkey more freedom of action over the other regional issues. This is first, I think. The second one, Turkey is trying to balancing its adversaries across the regions, including Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and other countries. And we can say also Turkey is also trying to balance the friends and even Russia. This is amazing, in terms of the historical transformation of Turkish foreign policy. And of course, the third point is Turkey is perceiving Libya as the part of its regional projection of power, or the power projection policy. So probably we will see a very comprehensive and detailed military, economic, and political agreements between Turkey and GNA governments in the coming days. They will declare some sort of details about military and technical issues, what Turkey is going to do in El Watia, what Turkey is going to do in El Sirte ports, and so on, so other places of Libya, and all these agreement and technical detail will provide Turkey more freedom of maneuver in terms of projecting its military power and capacity, which is far away from its near abroad. And of course, fourth point, in terms of post Berlin and strategic landscape, there is also huge economic opportunity for Turkey, and I can say that Turkey is sharing the economic, the economic consequences of the reconstruction process of Libya. We know that Italy is going to invest Tripoli airport, and Germany is going to prepare the roadways between Misrata and Tripoli. This is really good in terms of sharing the economic cost of the reconstruction. Of course, that there is also economic benefit for Turkey, and which Turkey wants to achieve. Of course, this is the reality. This is the part of the reality of any country's foreign policy. And of course, the diplomatic activism. This is the final point I want to underline. This also provides a new kind of room for Turkey to to show its diplomatic activism, not only over the Libyan crisis specifically, but also in its relation with Russia, in its relation with United States, in its relation with Germany, even France and Italy, Malta, and other countries. So we can say that, for example, there is an ongoing rapprochement between Turkey and United States. There is a good relations because of the Libyan crisis between Turkey, Tunisia, and Algeria. So this is my, I think, final word. Thank you.
Thank you, Murat. So I will save my questions. I'll try to combine them with the questions that are posed. There are quite a few. I just want to turn to the audience questions now. Thank you both for giving such a comprehensive view on this. Murat, my question was going to be about the risks to Turkey, right? The security risks. We saw July 4th attack on that air base, for instance, and Turkey has deployed drones and air defense systems in there. And then I'm combining with this question with an audience question, which is about Egypt's threat to confront GNA in Sirte. How realistic is that threat of Egyptian boots on the ground, and how would Turkey react to this? So how would Turkey handle risks, real risks and potential conflict against its resources on the ground in Libya?
Yeah, thank you, Kadir. This is a very important question. I think there are many risks, of course. There are many risks and opportunities, but your question is about risks. First of all, there are military risks. This is a hybrid war, or if you can define also the asymmetric war. I mean, there are many proxies, there are many foreign militias which are involving into the crisis. But the main risk from the military perspective is a potential confrontation, especially military confrontation between real states, right? So now, I mean, there are many real states which are involving into the crisis, into the conflict, but they ignore, you know, one way or another. They ignore, but
Each other.
each other. Yeah, they ignore each other. But there are always conflict, potential conflict, military conflict between the parties. So this is one of the important risks, and preventing the de-escalation of the military conflict is a very difficult task, I would say. I mean, United Nations doesn't work very well. United States doesn't work very well in terms of its international, affairs. I mean, who cares how many states are fighting against each other in Libya under the shadow of COVID-19? So this is the first, risks. And the second one is double quote, overstretching of Turkish foreign policy in terms of military capacity. Of course, there is a huge military capacity of Turkey, and now Turkey, guaranteed the Tripoli, security of Tripoli. Turkey now supported and organized the warfare capacity of GNA forces on the ground, and now they have very important capacity. Even they didn't know how to fight in this kind of war. And Turkey, I think, is very helpful in terms of enhancing the capacity, warfare capacity of the GNA forces. They have also military equipment, and they know how to use it against the Haftar forces. But if the parties want to transform the nature of war from hybrid to traditional, then it's going to be very difficult for Turkey to push back all, very strong countries, including Russia, France, Egypt. Of course, Egypt is an exception in terms of respecting its military capacity to the battlefield. I don't believe that, Egypt has a real red line, even though President Sisi declared his red line. He cannot, I think, militarily implement his objective in the Libyan crisis. But when we take into consideration other regional countries' military capacity, it would be very difficult to contain and prevent potential military conflict for Turkey.
Okay, thank you, Murat. Talha, I want to continue with Egypt because you made a comment and there's an audience question. It says, you indicated the role of Egypt is not necessarily always supportive to the Haftar side. This is kind of surprising. Egypt has always considered Haftar as its own project. Can Egypt, for example, lean to Turkey's side at one point? Is that possible in light of major differences between Turkey and Egypt under Sisi? And I want to add another question to that. It's not directly related, but again, its impact on the relationship with Russia. To what degree has the situation in Libya hurt relations with Russia for Turkey?
I mean, I will start with the Egypt question. So interestingly, although the leaders of two countries do not like each other, but they don't have too many conflict of interest. And I see Egypt's position in Libya more flexible in comparison to other actors. So that's what I wanted to highlight. So I don't understand why Egypt is following United Arab Emirates or France. I mean, Egypt is there, geopolitically strong, and agreeing with Turkey in Eastern Mediterranean will serve the interest of Egypt rather than agreeing with Cyprus and other actors. So if there is maritime delimitation agreement between Egypt and Turkey, it will boost Egypt's interest. If they agree on trade matters, it will boost mutual interests. So I don't see any conflict of interest. Of course, Egypt may be committed to Haftar, but they can change their side and may play more significant constructive role in support of parliament in the eastern part of the country. So I don't
Talha,
see.
sorry,
Mhm.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned the ideological dimension and how anti kind of the Gulf has been waging a war against sort of what they see as Muslim Brotherhood in the region, and Egypt, under Sisi, MB has been jailed and persecuted. So can they still overcome that, do you think?
Yes, I mean, ideological disagreement continues, but Turkey, is not just committed to Muslim Brotherhood. So any popular actors, the people, Turkey wants to maintain constructive relations with the peoples of these countries, including Algeria, Tunisia. So that's significant. So Turkey does not consider Egyptian people in a negative sense. So that's what I'm saying. So those people who are not in favor of Muslim Brotherhood is not the enemy of Turkey. That's so, and I see lots of advantages for both Turkey and Egypt if they reach an agreement on that ground. For the Russia question, Russia, it's much more complicated. Of course, it affects Turkey's relations with Russia negatively, but unlikely that the picture that's seen from Washington, Turkey's relations with Russia is not an alliance. So there's a deep disagreement on the future of Syria and other issues, or in Ukraine. So, but they want to just limit the civil war in Syria. So there is no major agreement between Turkey and Russia, but they can work very skillfully in diplomatic arena. So there is again disagreement in Libya, but I'm optimistic about a diplomatic deal with Russia and Turkey, because they sorted out many difficult issues, including the plane issue, jet issue. They tried to sort out the Syrian issue. So despite their disagreement on many grounds, they may find opportunities to deal with these differences. So I don't see any, clear agreement between Turkey and, Russia on Libyan ground.
Yeah, thank you, Talha. I think we just answered the next question a little earlier, but I'll ask it anyway because it's contextualized a little different to both of you. Isn't the key to resolve this to ignore France and Russia and have Turkey GNA find a way to provide comfort to Egypt and UAE that the new Libya will not be a foothold for Muslim Brotherhood? Murat, I want to turn to you about that because I think Talha said a few words on that. I'll get back to him. What do you think? I think you're muted, by the way.
Yes, I think this is also another good question. But I'm not sure this plan or this proposed, hypothesis will work to solve the Libyan crisis, because there are many mutually constructive relationships between France and other countries in the region. For example, France's foreign minister has many special relations with United Arab Emirates. So it's not possible, right? It's not possible for United Arab Emirates and Egypt, even Egypt, because Egypt is directly dependent on United Arab Emirates, especially on economy. And Sisi, in order to maintain its power in domestic politics, Sisi has to do what United Arab Emirates impose to Egypt to do in Libya. And when we look at the behind the scene, the France is the important player to shape the idea, the strategy of the countries in the region against the GNA government. So therefore, I think it's not possible to exclude or to separate United Arab Emirates from France. It is also not possible to exclude France from any potential political solution in Libya, because Libya is not a local conflict. Libya is a regional conflict in which all the regional countries, one way or another, have to agree over a political solution. There is no other option. There is no, I think, military solutions for Libyan crisis.
Thank you. Talha, you talked about this a little earlier, but there's the assumption in this question that if Turkey reassured Egypt and UAE that, you know, Muslim Brotherhood won't be strong in Libya, that could somehow contribute to the resolution of the conflict. Can you address this with a couple sentences, perhaps?
Well, I mean, I think the objectives of Egypt and UAE are different. So I think UAE instrumentalized the threat of Islamism. It is their, you know, expansionism tool for the region. So they intervene everywhere with this pretext. So I don't think UAE's expectations can be satisfied. They are just revisionist actors that are using Islamism. They are not, you know, very much interested. So they are sponsoring Medhali Salafis, most extremist Islamists on the ground. So it doesn't make sense. For Egypt, it's understandable their concerns. So yes, I mean, the current administration may have negative views, but again, I mean, for Turkey, what is important in Libya is to have sustainable state capacity and sustainable popular support for the government. So Turkey is not committed to any, you know, political faction and ideology. So, and Turkey is also in favor of the solution of these militia groups or religious militia, any kind of militia. So strong central government. So I think there's more common ground to work, sort out the differences, you know, between Egypt and Turkey. And in Libya, Muslim Brotherhood is not the biggest issue, I think. So Libyan actors are very moderate and they can be accommodated easily.
Thank you. Murad,
I forgot to mention the Muslim Brotherhood's aspect of your question. I'm sorry. And I would like to also mention something. There are the Muslim Brotherhoods in Libya. I think we should ask for, first of all, this question. Are they really in power in Libya? No. So how about the militia whom they are fighting under the so-called Libyan National Army? Who are they? I mean, as Talha mentioned rightly, I mean, Medhali Salafism is one of the important popular ideological reference points for all militias who are fighting under the LNA. So therefore, I think we have to, you know, understand first of all who in the Libyan context, and we should really look at the potential of and real potential of Muslim Brotherhood in Libya. I think all these arguments are used in order to justify the position of other countries in the region, especially France, you know, United Arab Emirates and Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys. I think that's the regional ideological kind of confrontation argument, the contextualization you guys talked about may have led some to believe that that was a real thing in Libya. But yes, I mean, Muslim Brotherhood footprint is nothing as significant as in Egypt, let's say. But so there's another question about, again, something that Talha talked about, but I just want to ask you, Murat, only because we are running out of time. Mm-hmm. And if you can answer briefly, that would be appreciated. Mm-hmm. But both these Libya and Syria conflicts, how does it affect the long-term partnership between Russia and Turkey?
I think this is a very important dynamics in the context of Libyan and Syrian crisis. So there is a link between two crises in terms of the actors which are involving into the both crises. But in terms of their strategic priority, Turkey's strategic priority is much more than Russian strategic priority over Libya. So therefore, there are more space for Turkey to act with different actors, in which this, you know, freedom of space is not possible for Turkey in Syria. Do you see? I mean, what I mean? I mean, yeah. There are more opportunity for Turkey to work with the other countries, especially United States, Italy. But the same thing is not valid for Turkey in Syrian case.
Thank you, Murat. There's a very specific question to you. I'll read it. It's, can you further elaborate on Turkey's possibility to engage official defense resources, F-16 refueling capability, and not proxy actors or Libya-based UCAVs, Siha Bayraktar, for attacking the Al Jufra airbase, even if that means a direct confrontation with France and Egypt? Just few hours before the unknown attack in Al-Watiya base, Turkish presidency said the Al Jufra airbase declared a legitimate target. So it's highly specific.
First of all, I have to clarify your last point. This is, I think, very common misunderstanding because it was not translated into the English. You are talking about infograph, which is prepared by Communication Directorate of Turkey. It was not about the next target of Turkey will be, or the GNA will be, Jufra. The city under the targets by many actors. This is what they are saying in this infograph. The technical question about F-16, yes, this is true. I mean, but this is a political choice, by the way. It's not a military choice. But if this choice turns into a necessity, then Turkey has the capacity to carry out its air power into Libya. I think Watiya Air Base will provide a good opportunity for Turkey to use this kind of military capacity. But of course, again, I would like to strongly underline that this is going to be a political option, and we have to wait and see the consequences and readout of agreements, the technical agreements between Turkey and GNA government after Defense Minister Hulusi Akar visit to Libya.
I have one more for you, Murat. There's reports about Turkey bringing fighters from Syria into Libya. How does the military posture, Turkish military posture, look in Libya? The Turkish army being there, Turkish military forces. What is in what capacity? I mean, we have an agreement, we have an official invite by the government, recognized by the UN. I'm not talking about that, but how, in terms of operations, in terms of how they support the GNA.
I mean, you mean the Turkish military forces?
Turkish military forces, and then the Syrian fighters.
I don't now know the exact number of the Syrian fighters who are fighting against Khalifa Haftar forces in Libya, but after Turkey's military advisor in terms of tactical, strategic, and operational level, I know that they are starting to turn back to the Syria, because the local fighters, the militias under the GNA, I'm talking about the Libyan fighters, now I think are capable to fight in different battlefields. So therefore, there are no needs to transfer more, Syrian fighters into the Libyan crisis. On the other side, Turkish military force, I don't know of course, the exact number, but now they are advising, they are, organizing, and they are, helping to learn the tactical and operational level how to fight on battlefield.
Thank you, Murat. Talha, I want to turn to you. There's one question about, Russia, not only Egypt, has said an attack on Sirte or Jufra is a quote-unquote red line. How will Russia respond if the GNA attacks one of those sites?
Well, I mean, I think Russia doesn't have resources in Libyan case to further escalate the situation, and Russian involvement in Libya in such an extent would also be considered as a threat by US, AFRICOM as well. So I think any further escalation, Russian escalation against the GNA will lead involvement of some other actors to counterbalance Russia. So it wouldn't be in Russia's interest to further escalate and demonstrate capacities. The AFRICOM regularly mentions about Russian capacity on Libya and expresses the concerns. This may get into the NATO. So Turkey may gain further NATO support. We know that Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, is in support for Turkey's involvement in support of GNA. So I think this would be counterproductive for Russia, counterproductive for Haftar side or Egypt as well.
Thank you, Talha. I just want to go through the last 2-3 questions quickly, if we can. Murat, you talked about Berlin process. What was missing there in the Berlin process from the Turkish perspective?
I think there are many opportunities in terms of solving the Libyan crisis, but there are no obligatory process for the parties. After the Berlin process, Haftar's side had to implement the security sector reform, for example, but Haftar preferred to carry out his military operation against Tripoli. I think this is important, and the international community, I think, should support the points which were mentioned, underlined in Berlin agreement. So first of all, I think security sector reform is really important, and Turkey is ready to contribute to security sector reform. From Turkish perspective, this is a very important to stop the military conflict, first of all. And from another perspective, I think Talha has more experience on this point, that CVE, countering violent extremism, is another important point which were also mentioned by Berlin Agreement. Probably international community may contribute on this point as well in terms of preventing increase to violent extremism in this context. But in order to implement the Berlin Agreement, first of all, we need to declare a ceasefire. But no sides know after which point these parties should accept the ceasefire after the Turkey's involvement into the crisis. Sirt is really important, I think, red line for both sides.
Murat, very quickly, there is a question about Israel. There are many reports of Israel supporting LNA in Libya. Considering the US-Israel relationship, will the US go against Israel in Libya and support Turkey GNA access? So I'm not sure about Israel's role in Libya.
I'm not also focusing on Israel, what Israel is trying to do in Egypt, in Libya, but this is another wrong strategy for Israel. I think in terms of the Turkey-Israeli potential cooperation over Mediterranean, you will say that the unofficial position, which is shaped by official people, believe that the cooperation between Turkey and Israel is really, really important to, gain more advantages from the natural resources and other, resources, natural resources on Eastern Mediterranean. So therefore, I think this is another inconclusive attempt for Israel in this regional competition.
Thank you, Talha. Last question. What is Turkey's strategy beyond Libya in North Africa? How does Turkey see Tunisia's and Algeria's positions with regards to the Libyan conflict?
This crisis, the Libya crisis, actually strengthened Turkey's position in North Africa. So Turkey, in order to maintain stability, so Algeria and Tunisia are very much concerned about stability in Libya, and they see that the pro-LNA coalition are destabilizing Libya, and this may take a longer-term exploitation of Libya. So actually, within Turkey's involvement and strengthening of the legitimate government, Turkey played more constructive roles, more constructive relations with Algeria and Tunisia. Of course, they tried to keep their neutrality in the civil war. They don't want to get involved in the civil war, but diplomatically, Turkey put a lot of emphasis on Tunisia and Algeria, and I think this is a promising approach. So Turkey would, in order to counterbalance the influence of Egypt on the other side, Turkey would try to strengthen Libya's ties with Algeria and Tunisia, and both countries may benefit from this situation. Of course, Turkey would prefer to also have positive, constructive relations with Egypt, but I think the Turkey's balancing role played constructively for both Algeria and Tunisia.
Well, thank you very much, Talha. I really appreciate both of you joining us today to explain what Turkey's interests are in Libya and what Turkey is doing. But also, we've heard so much more about the regional dynamics, which wasn't exactly our focus. But as soon as you start talking about Libya, you're not talking about Libya anymore in many ways. Thank you very much for your comments, thoughtful comments, spending time to prepare for this and spending time to enlighten us. This is a topic that is not very easy to understand for a lot of audiences. This is our third event on Libya. So I appreciate you being here again. And I want to thank our audience for joining us, for their questions, very thoughtful questions as well.